shores of old Lake Erie stands our alma mater true. Fredonia state we proudly honor, with its colors white and blue.
Hi, I'm Jack Croxton, and welcome to our latest episode of Reflections of Fredonia. Let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I am a former faculty member at Fredonia. I taught here for over 40 years in the Department of Psychology. After retiring, I thought, well, what shall I do next? And I began to think about all the wonderful students I've had a chance to work with here at Fredonia, and that it might be fun to try to catch up with Fredonia alumni to see what they're up to in terms of their careers and give them a chance to think back and talk a little bit about their memories of the time they spent here as an undergraduate. We're recording this podcast from the Fredonia radio systems right here on campus.
Hello, my name is Chloe Kowalik. I graduated from Fredonia in May of 2024, and while I was a student there, I studied journalism and psychology, as well as minors in English and political science. And I also just got accepted into the clinical mental health counseling graduate program. So I'm kind of in a weird in-between era because I start in fall 2025. So kind of an alum, kind of going back. So yeah, perfect.
For today's podcast, we have a very special guest. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself by telling us your name and which year you graduated from Fredonia?
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Josh Gregory, and I graduated from SUNY Fredonia in 1996, way back when.
What did you study while you were a student here at Fredonia?
So I originally went to Fredonia to do two things. I wanted to run track, which did not actually come to fruition, and I also wanted to be an English teacher. And about halfway through my sophomore year, I had done the cardinal sin of falling in love with radio at WCVF, as it used to be back then, and quickly found that that's where my passion and my love was, and changed my major to communications with a specialization in audio production.
Awesome. That's super cool. I had a similar path with the communications, department here and kind of fallen in love with radio. I love to hear that. So what really made you want to come to Fredonia?
Well, those were the two things. It was I was a track athlete in the high school. I graduated from Lancaster Central School District right
Okay.
outside of Buffalo,
Yep.
and I loved to run. That's really all I was. Outside of my academics and band, I just was track, and Fredonia wasn't too far away. I'd been accepted in a couple of different places, but I loved the campus. I loved just the whole vibe of what was going on there. And I realized, I don't want to go home if I need to, but I also want to be far enough away that people will not bother me. And Fredonia was a perfect choice for that. And that's where I was, and I do not regret that for one moment.
Yeah, same thing for me. So I went to Depew High School, so maybe we have a little bit of beef, but that's okay.
We are rivals, but we
rivals.
will keep that out of the podcast.
So yeah, so I had the same kind of thing where it was super close, but just far enough away, but also still accessible from home, and perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what was your specialty in track?
So I was a sprinter and a jumper. So I ran the quarter mile, and also ran the 100 and 200 when needed, and did some relay work, and then was a long and a very poor triple jumper.
I assume you're still running as fast today as you did back then.
Only when chased.
Only when chased, yeah.
Well, do you have any favorite memories or experiences from the time you were here as a student?
I have so many that there's no way that we could actually cover them all. But when I found radio, it was actually during freshman orientation. I made friends with a guy who was it was my partner, my first radio show partner. His name is Mike Wallows. He's a terrific guy. He's doing extremely well for himself in public relations, which is what I do now as well. And he and I learned about, hey, there's a radio station here, and we just, however, we hit it off. Said, we're doing this. There's no way we're not going to have our own show. And the music that we were into was back then probably a little bit different than the mainstream. It's a little bit more mainstream now, but we were into just a lot of really crazy punk, hardcore punk, experimental music,
Mm-hmm.
John Zorn. I mean, what have you. Our show was actually called Noise on Earth, and it was on Rock 600. And we just played anything that we could find in the stacks that we knew were dusty and probably nobody else was touching. And we had a blast with it. And that was, truly where my love for radio began. And that I would say is my biggest and favorite memory of those days of doing a radio show and, having the guidelines, but a lot of leeway as to what we wanted to play and what we could do, which, commercial radio is the exact opposite of that. And, and everything that I did, as my relationship grew with everyone else at the station, whether it was community members, most importantly, our advisor, Dan Bergren, who is, I still consider him a mentor today, for, the podcasting and stuff that I do now. And, the memories of that teamwork that we had there, the other folks that I met as I became more involved. I was a staff rep for a little bit, and then I became a program director on the FM side. I was a station manager, which happened happenstance. They just needed somebody. Someone was transferring, and just the way that we all worked together, it was an unbelievable experience. We were, if I was not working at the old main inn, I was a disc jockey there, and I wasn't in a production lab, that's where you would find me. Everyone knew that I would be in my office at back then WCVF. And the relationships that I made there still exist today. When you first asked me to do this, I listened to one of the podcasts, and it was Jim Ranney, who I would go on to know from, working in the professional world.
Mm-hmm.
And just those relationships are everlasting. And and all the funny little things that happened along the way when we moved from Gregory Hall over to McEwen, that was crazy. I went a little overboard, and I love vinyl records. I always have. And that was one of my favorite memories, was reorganizing the record section and just going through everything in alphabetical order, and really that psychotic take that you see in the movie High Fidelity, where everything has to be by genre, alphabetical order. That doesn't belong here. Who put this over here? Um, and I just, I'm trying to, it was just such a magical time for me to, I grew up with a tape recorder, and I had my own radio show when I was a little kid with my stuffed animals. I'm not shy about
Aw.
telling anyone that. And never once considering that that could be a career. And then finding that at Fredonia was so eye-opening, and just like I said, it was magical and it was wonderful, and it led me to my first job in radio right out of college. After my internship at WBFO, I started at WGR 550 back then,
Mhm.
and it just took off.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about your career. So you told us that you're currently in public relations, but you had a radio career going at a few stations. You currently have a podcast, and you're doing voice work. So you're still very involved kind of in that industry. So kind of tell us, like, what was that journey like, when you graduated and kind of got that first job to where you are now?
Starting at GR was a dream come true. We all start off at the basics, and I don't want to say at the bottom, but as a board op and running other people's shows,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time being asked to do, the sports was at 15 and 45 back then, being able to anchor a sports. So your voice is actually on the air, and it's like, oh my gosh, how is this happening? This is amazing. And quickly after I started there, I was asked to be a weekend host on sports talk radio, and which led me to a lot of other experiences with the Buffalo Sabres and the Buffalo Bisons. I was there in Game 6 with my partner in crime, Kevin Sylvester, who was a Fredonia grad of '95.
Yep.
He's the one who actually encouraged me in radio, and he and I went on to work at WBEN shortly after that. We had our time at GR and then went to BEN, and he was the play-by-play man, and I was the color man for a new Arena League football team in town. I also ran the morning show and covered the Sabres. That's all that Game 6 debacle and all the fun
Mm-hmm.
that came with that. And at the end of the first season, the team was terrible, and they needed a new director of media relations, which I had never done before. and they liked what I did on the broadcast. They knew that I was passionate about the team, that I liked the team, that I got along with the coaches and the players and the front office staff. And they offered that job to me. And it was not an easy decision to leave radio
Right.
for the reasons of the passion. It was for the pocketbook. And back then, we did not make very much money. But you did it because you loved it. It was, I think anyone that you would talk to on this podcast from the world of radio, especially here in Western New York, would tell you that, again, that teamwork that I felt at WCVF was the same at GR, it was the same at BEN. But that's how I actually kind of transitioned into the world of public relations. Now, I did moonlight a little bit still. I would fill in for Clip Smith once in a while, and did go back to WGR in another stint in the early 2000s as a weekend talk show host. I hosted Saturdays and Sundays, would do afternoon sports, would fill in for guys who couldn't make it. So if one of the morning guys couldn't be there, I was the first call up there. And went back to radio while still doing PR stuff until in 2010, when I decided that if I ever went back to radio, I was not going to talk about sports. As much as I love them, I was like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And I had an opportunity with a fellow GR and BEN alumnus who became the program director of WECK. It was changing to an all talk format, and they allowed me to have a 3-hour show on Sunday nights about the paranormal.
Oh wow.
And it was like, how much farther away from sports can I
That
get?
is, yeah,
Right.
that was quite the jump.
Yeah, and I did that for 3 years, then did it on internet radio, and actually started my own internet station with some friends that I had that were also doing paranormal shows.
Hmm.
And then I got into podcasting because it was just at that point in my life, it was really hard to carve out that time. We had just had, our daughter come into our lives, and it was really hard to set aside 2 or 3 hours every Sunday night, knowing that you had to be there. When I realized that, hey, I can just record these, produce them, mix them, make them exactly what I want. And I started 2 different ones, and I kept the radio show, but then it was a podcast. And then I started a podcast called Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories, which you can hear on all the platforms and YouTube. And that surprised me how quickly that took off. And I still continue to maintain that today. So I love when you talk about, how you kept those roots in radio still viable in my personal life. That's how that happened. But I also do a podcast for the company I work with, which is the Global Vending Company. And we make book vending machines and STEM kit vending machines for schools and other organizations. And I also have continued to do voiceover work. And in all the jobs that I did, everyone wanted to do promotional videos, promotional spots or whatever. And I kept, the skills that I learned at Fredonia in play in my PR life as well. And again, still do so today. So everything that I do, whether it is my personal stuff with a podcast or the podcast I do for work, which is called the Reading Revolution, it's literacy based. I would not have been able to do any of this without my start at Fredonia, 100%.
Well, I know you wanted to get away from sports, but I have to ask, during that phase of your career, did you get to interact with many of the professional players in Buffalo?
Oh yes, oh yeah. So, and it's funny because I still maintain friendships with a number of those guys.
Aw.
We found each other on social media. Actually, I just found out Curtis Brown, who played for the Sabres, was in town, and I was joking with all my friends. I said he still owes me $50, and but I still once in a while I'll bump into Mike Pekka or Matt Barnaby is still around.
That's so
I see
cool.
him. Jason Daw a little bit earlier than those guys. But yeah, I mean that was part of the job too, which was a really rough awakening from someone who was just doing radio shows to now you have to interact with these guys and you have to learn their vibe and you have to know when they're having a good day and when they're having a bad day. And, when I mentioned game 6, an unbelievably tense night, that for those not familiar, that was the no goal. That's what gave the Dallas Stars the Stanley Cup. It was a wonderful experience to be able to work with all of those players and Lindy Ruff and all, the other coaches. I mean, even down to the equipment guys. It was a lot of fun. But again, if I hadn't cut my chops learning how to interview people, in reading the room and reading a person, there's no way that I would have been able to capitalize and be successful in that vein if I hadn't started somewhere. And again, I'm forever thankful for again the guidance of Dan Bergren and all of my friends at CVF who helped me along.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like Fredonia kind of helped you get your start, helped you figure out kind of what you're interested in, give you those starting skill sets.
And all I have to say is that definitely was not a goal.
No, it was not. No, and we were all stuck. And I'll tell you a quick sidebar story. We're all stuck in the locker room waiting, and Lindy Ruff would not let the players come out to address the media. And now Kevin Sylvester and I are there. We're teammates at BEN, and we're waiting for Dominic Hasek to come out. And Gil Korbajian, who was their PR guy, their media guy, just kept saying, "Guys, we're holding on, we're holding on, we're holding on." And Kevin says, "Hey, why don't you go over and get some sound from the Dallas Stars locker room?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." So we switched places, and I happened to be right in the front. I go into that locker room. It is full of cigar smoke and guys yelling and craziness and champagne, and you name it.
Oh
I mean,
my,
they're
I
celebrating. They
bet.
just won the greatest trophy, in my opinion, in all of sports. And I remember standing in the doorway, and I was like, I'm not going in there. Nope, I'm not doing it.
Right.
Eventually went back and did get some things, but I remember just being like, no, I'm not doing this. It's a complete injustice. How am I going to remain objective? And I'm glad you asked that question, because having to remain objective is very tough. I don't happen to be a Sabres fan. I want them to win. I'm not a Bills fan. I want them to win. And it's funny how that worked out, that being able to make those connections with players and wanting them to succeed, but not being so emotionally attached to it, actually, I think kind of helped out the way that I did business when I had to go into locker rooms and had to do interviews and that sort of thing.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I have to ask also, how did you get interested in the paranormal?
Since I was a kid, I was always into ghosts and Bigfoot and all the weird
That's
stuff
cool.
I think the way that I always said it about my show was, you may not have had a paranormal experience, but I guarantee you know someone who says they did.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And but yeah, there was just a love from all that crazy weird stuff from when I was a kid. And I always thought, there's no one really. I mean, Art Bell did on his overnight program. He was the pioneer of that, and Art we dearly missed. But I thought, nobody's really doing this justice on a local level. They get caught up with the glamour of, they want to talk to the TV show Ghost Hunters and all that. And I vowed that those are the people I don't want to talk to. I want to talk to the folks who are really doing this, some of them for a living, and folks who have expertise in everything from acupuncture to going out into the woods looking for, this crazy 400-pound wood ape that supposedly exists roaming around the countryside. And that was really the tack that I took. I wanted to talk to the real faces, not the airbrush stuff that you saw on TV.
Yeah.
And people love it. And I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Right now, I'm kind of in talks with a couple of stations here that want me to bring that show back. It's called The Edge of the Unknown, but that's still up in the air. But if that happens, I will be back on terrestrial radio, and very excited about that as
Oh,
well.
that's awesome.
How do you feel your time at Fredonia helped to shape your career and where you are today? And then, as a follow up, what advice would you offer to current Fredonia students?
Wonderful question. You know, and I kind of mentioned being, working in the bar scene, which
I
everybody
was
knows
gonna
what that
ask
is
you
there.
about that. I was gonna ask you about that, but I wasn't sure if you'd want me to bring it up.
No, I'm
Because it was
more than
OMI
proud.
at the time for you, which
It
we call
was.
it
It
Old
was.
Main.
Yeah, it was Old Main, and I got hired to work Thursdays and Saturdays, which ended up
Oh, those
working
are
Sunday
Thursdays
nights
are
because we had
BOGOs.
live Palooza, and
Yeah.
but what I wanted to say was, working with the folks who were there, very different personalities. We all had a lot of fun. We had our moments, but we all had a lot of fun, and working with crowds of people, um, really kind of, again, honed that ability to read the room and to be able to do PR.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds silly, but
No,
again, PR
yeah.
is about that personal touch.
Yep.
And we had that in classes, we had that in campus, and you have that with the guys that you live with on campus, off campus. But all of the experiences in Fredonia itself, whether it was working or going to the library or doing whatever, and dealing with and working with a lot of other people really made it a little bit easier to not only be able to interview people, as we've talked about, but be able to craft and tell stories. And again, one of those intangibles that you don't get from a textbook, you don't get that from being on the radio per se, but being around a lot of different people, because SUNY Fredonia, Fredonia State, as I always called it, attracts folks from all across the state, some of them out of state. And it was just such a wonderful experience to be able to have a radio show with a guy from Queens, and have a roommate from Lackawanna, and have guys that I lived with from Rochester and further downstate, and then work with all these people in a experience outside of the classroom. I mean, all of it just culminates into being able to work with other people, deal with crazy situations, and deal with really smooth situations as well, and do it all with as much grace as you possibly can. My advice to anyone at going into college, whether it's at Fredonia, I would hope that they would go there. My bride is a 97 grad,
Oh, cool.
or no, 99 grad, sorry.
Uh-huh.
I did not meet her. Well, she was a freshman when I was a senior. We did not meet there, but she was very involved with the things that she was as well. Very successful career as well. But my advice is, I didn't go there with the intention of getting into radio. I wouldn't have known if I wasn't open to new ideas and doing different things. And it sounds really cliche and silly, but it's the truth. Don't go anywhere, especially into college, with blinders on. It helps out if you know exactly what you want to do. That's terrific. But don't let those other things slip by you. Don't let the other opportunities go past you, because you never know how those experiences are going to pay dividends in the future. So when you're going to college, get involved. Start off on a radio show on a Monday night that you have no idea if anybody's listening to it or not, but do it with everything that you got. That's the other small part of the advice that I would share with anybody is give it everything that you got, because whether or not you think you're getting something out of it, you truly are. And don't take setbacks as the end of the world. When life kicks you in the teeth, you got to get back up again and wait for the next one, because everything is a learning experience. And, in PR, I have great days and I have not so great days, but all of it is a learning experience. And it's the same thing that you're going to get out of your college experience. Take the good with the bad, but always be open to everything.
Well, that is certainly excellent advice. This just about does it for our interview today. Josh, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm very honored that you've reached out to me. And again, I cannot stress how thankful I am for my time at Fredonia, and all the friendships that I've made that still last to this day. Give Fredonia a shot if you're on the fence about it. Go down, meet some people, and again, learn, experience. You will not be disappointed if you make the choice to go to Fredonia State. And hey, while you're there, get involved with Fredonia Radio Systems. You will find that you do fit in with whatever tack you're taking in life. They need you as much as you can learn from them.
Great. Thank you so much for appearing on our podcast today. I'm Jack Croxton.
And I'm Chloe Kowalik, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
Sing its glory and its praises. Let them ring forever true. Beloved is our alma mater, Fredonia State.